Alright, hello and welcome to my greenhouse here in central Scotland. Doing a little tour today with Hendry from Cape Carnivores. So I think I better just start kind of yapping about some of the things we've got in here. So kind of operating at reduced capacity at the moment, so we're only about, I would say, a third full in the greenhouse. We kind of got old pots rammed up there and old fish tanks and things like that, and little on the lower benches. But anyway, what we do have, I'm gonna chat about today. So starting off by the door, we've got primarily Sarracenia, as in Drosera and Venus flytraps. Although there is a Pinguicula that has snuck in there as well now. That's a new one. So we've got a kind of collection of South African sundews here, Drosera. Mostly from Nigel Hewitt Cooper's collection. He's got some fantastic Drosera. So we've got a variety of kind of what's that? Esterhausenia, I think. Cuneifolia, Venusta. We're back. So we've got South Africans here. This greenhouse is unheated over winter, and it does get pretty chilly because Scotland's kind of like got a bump in the middle, so I'm kind of right at the top of the bump. So it was about, I think it bottomed out around minus 14 degrees Celsius. I don't know in American units. You guys are going to have to figure that out yourself.
I'll caption it.
So this is pretty chilly for South Africans. It's kind of more than they can handle, really, but they do come back from the roots relatively well. This one, managed to survive, and they're only coming back. So June is kind of early summer here in Scotland. So through to probably about August is when these guys are going to start looking good. But as you can see, we've got flowers coming on things like Drosera regia here. That's quite good because it is winter dormant. Two flowers coming us. So I think this, and there's another one down here. My hands are getting very sticky here. Yeah, here's a second flower. But yeah, winter dormant species, that dies back. I find growing it in a big pot. This is planted all in just sphagnum here with a kind of live top dressing of just pillow moss here. So that'll get to about usually around 50 centimetres tall at the kind of end of summer, August, September type of time. And again, planted in sphagnum. There's a big move, certainly in the UK and Europe, to do with sustainability of peat, because there has been historic over-harvesting of peat in Scotland and in Ireland particularly. So moving away, and in fact there's actually a horticultural peat ban being introduced in Scotland. So a lot of carnivorous plant growers like myself are kind of having to either stockpile or find alternatives. But so far, sphagnum seems to be the kind of the front runner, sort of like pre-peat anyway, since most peat here is made of sphagnum. A couple of interesting capensas as well. This one's from Kochelberg, really long, narrow leaves, and this one's from Hout Bay, which is a kind of really low altitude area. But that gets super broad leaves. It's a really nice clone. But again, I find certainly in cold environments like Scotland, in this unheated greenhouse for capensas, having a deep pot really helps because the frost kind of has difficulty getting to the core of it. So you do get some surviving roots, and then they come back. You can see these are just sort of resprouting. I've got a kind of, this is my one foray into pygmy Drosera as well, right? This was a pot of Dysa racemosa orchids, but they died off because of the cold, and I have just left a weed behind. I don't know what this is. I think it's possibly Drosera nitidula, I think. I'm not entirely sure. I don't really know too much about pygmy sundews. Venus flytraps as well, but in my opinion, Venus flytraps are some of the most boring carnivorous plants. So a couple of ones, upright green. This is phalanx at the back. I have been kind of emasculating the flowers because I don't want them to put too much energy into seed production, so those can go and fertilise the lawn outside. Shark's tooth, a couple of kind of mixed, I think this is probably fake B52, I don't think it's the real thing. This one I think is Clayton's volcanic red, red piranha, Chopin steel, which gets these kind of interesting kind of caruncles on the petioles. That's interesting. And then a couple of the kind of southern temperate sundews as well. So this is Drosera uniflora. Uniflora? Yeah, uniflora. I always mix up flora and folia. But yeah, so that kind of dies back to a very small bud over winter for me. Although they're technically, I think they're supposed to technically be homophilous or only producing one kind of leaf. So unlike your kind of true temperates like Drosera rotundifolia, which I guess is like the kind of northern hemisphere analogue, which dies back to a very small resting hibernaculum or bud. This just sort of reduces its size a bit. But yeah, this is growing in a really nice sphagnum species as well. Sphagnum strictum, which gets this really dense pillowy growth. So it's really nice for kind of small or slow growing or low growing plants. But a couple of things in there. Drosera murfettii as well, really ancestral species. It's sort of the tentacles on it are battened down from overhead watering, but really ancestral species. It produces both carnivorous and non-carnivorous leaves. So from Australia, New Zealand. In fact, I don't know if murfettii is from Australia, but anyway, its close relative Arcturi is certainly from Tasmania as well as New Zealand. So yeah, really kind of ancestral old species. I do have a stenoglottis cutting in there somewhere, but it's tiny. Yeah, look at that. It's a tiny little root cutting of stenoglottis, which I do hope it survives, but we'll see. This is a natural hybrid, a temperate one from Northern Europe as well, Bellesiana. So it's a result of hybridization between Drosera rotundifolia and intermedia, and then there was some polyploidy or duplication of the genome involved. So it's now a Notho species or a named hybrid, Bellesiana. This is a new addition. So primarily my love with carnivorous plants is the family Lentibulariaceae, which is your Pinguicula, your butterworts, your Utricularia, or bladderworts, and Gemlicia, which is corkscrew plants. So the temperate Pinguicula kind of produce this kind of summer rosette and then die back to a hibernaculum as well. So that's grandiflora, which is a very common species across Europe. That one's from Italy on the French-Italian border. Moving across, I do have kind of succulents and things as well. We've got Drosophilum here, which is a kind of a species from northern Africa, so on the very northern tip of Morocco and the southern Iberian Peninsula. So it's unusually a really dry growing carnivore, but yeah, lovely. It smells of honey on a hot day as well, so it's beautiful in amongst the other succulents there. Got some other things here as well. Stylidiums, trigger plants. I wonder if I've got a little thing to poke here. So trigger plants are known as trigger plants. I don't know if it's too cold to do it today, but they have no show today. Anyway, usually this pollen hammer here, I can't remember this technical term for it. It's combined anthers and stigma, but it will snap across really fast and basically dab pollinators with pollen. But they've got glandular flowers which are like maybe carnivorous. So a couple there. We've got, this is a simile, I think. Kind of got succulent leaves, which is quite nice in a rosette here. Simile, Graminifolia, Armeria, Corymbosum, I think. Chispitosum here with some Utricularia. Irene and Debile as well. It's too cold and it doesn't get warm enough over winter, and they're probably nutrient deficient as well. You know, I've seen much better examples growing in places like California, but unfortunately the weather's not that good here. Cephalotus as well. Now obviously, as I was saying about peat, we're trying to move away from peat here in UK growing. So this is all grown in 100% coconut husk, which actually, as you can see, works relatively well for Cephalotus. So this is a clone from Northcliffe, and this is just a kind of standard clone which took a severe battering this winter when it got down to properly freezing, but it has come back from the rhizome. You can see it's working on a couple of growing points. I find the coconut husk quite insulative. And yeah, here as well we've got some Disa orchids, however you want to say it. They're really good companions for carnivorous plants. I grow mine in live sphagnum. They don't like hot roots, so a terracotta pot helps for evaporative cooling. I know some people say that terracotta kind of accumulates minerals and things like that. Scotland has really soft tap water, down to about 13 parts per million total dissolved solids for me. So it works quite well in terracotta. But live sphagnum certainly they enjoy. But lovely, beautiful orchids to grow as companions. Here we've got some of the kind of more calciculus or calcium-loving Pinguicula. So this is Pinguicula hertiflora from Mount Olympus. I've seen it sold as Lewisii, but having looked at the kind of more recent keys of features for these subspecies, I think it is actually just hertiflora, the nominate subspecies. I did have more clones of this, as you can see from the tags on empty pots, but unfortunately I let the trade dry out while I was away, so they died off. But yeah, lovely. This is I think section Cardiophyllum, I think it is. But yeah, the Homophilus ones, they're they're not entirely cold hardy, but they are pretty good. And this is another one. This is Pinguicula hertiflora, about to flower as well. And a companion orchid here, Spiranthes, ladies' tresses orchid. Moving across, we have some temperate Utricularia or bladderworts. I find that these are kind of more difficult to grow in a compact setup. They really benefit from having a kind of established aquatic ecosystem. So we're kind of getting there on the first one. You know, we've got this Carex panicea or carnation sedge growing here. We've got some juncus and we've got some other things. You know, these kind of little ferns here, Marsilea, Palulifera, and a Nymphea down in here as well. But yeah, Utricularia inflata. I don't know if you guys know the species, but it's the one that produces those kind of rafts of sort of inflatable floats, basically, to hold the flowers out of the water. I think we have some Purpurea down here as well, so different section. Yeah, this is Purpurea, which kind of just looks like pond slime at the moment. But yeah, nice purple flowers on that one, which is unusual for aquatic Utricularia. And then over the back we've got Striata from Georgia in the United States, the state, not the country. And there is some Utricularia australis somewhere in the back as well there, from a Scottish site. And then next door we have, and sorry, I should say, obviously I'm using this pennywort, this hydrocotyle, as well as this grass to soak up extra nutrients, and you can see it's working quite well because the water's pretty clear of algae. Not so much in this side as well. Using this iris here, Iris pseudochorus, as a kind of soak for nutrients. But this is Utricularia floridana from Lake Jackson, which produces these kind of feathery fronds that float up, and then it anchors itself in the sand or mud and produces more carnivorous, non-photosynthesizing leaves. But again, in here I've got kind of pots with grasses and pinguiculas and things like that to soak up additional nutrients. This is the Sarracenia banishment zone, which is the ones that I want to sell or I don't like them particularly much, so they get banished as punishment.
Yeah, they're looking a little crispy back there.
Yeah, a little bit. I water that when I remember to, but which is not very often. These are sort of generic bog companion plants, but there are some carnivores that are sneaking in there, you know. Utricularia rotundifolia.
Utricularia?
Yeah. What?
Drosera.
I'm losing my head. Right. Drosera rotundifolia, which is a kind of native of Scotland, and it's everywhere for me, in fruit and flower here. Another kind of acid-loving or bog-loving plants, Hosta venusta from a friend in Sweden. It's the world's smallest hosta species. And then this is bog asphodel. Can't remember what that one's called. Anyway, lovely yellow flowers on it. They used to think it caused brittle bones in cattle, but that's just an effect of the fact that it grows on very poor calcium soils, so the cows weren't getting much calcium anyway. Different kind of Ericaceae family, more dicot orchid here is finished flowering, Tripetaloides. This is lingonberry, Vaccinium vitis idea. Another Ericaceae, this is bog rosemary, Andromeda polifolia, which is really nice. produces all of this kind of Ericaceae family produces lovely bell-shaped flowers, and many produce edible fruit as well. And you've also got little wild cranberries growing here in this Sphagnum capillifolium. So this kind of creeping thing is wild cranberry. And Sphagnum capillifolium is kind of familiar to many carnivorous plant growers as a lovely red top dressing. Other rhododendrons, like Rhododendron canadense. And then from the myrtle family, Myrtaceae, we've got Myrica gale, sweet gale it's sometimes called in North America. We call it bog myrtle, so it's a lovely scented plant. It's got a beautiful kind of almost camphor, almost eucalyptus smell. Here we've got my limited selection of Sarracenia, and one Darlingtonia sneaking in there as well. A lot of the Darlingtonia in the UK are descended from one clone that is relatively cold, warm, hard, or heat resistant. I think it was in the mid-80s there was a big heat wave that killed off pretty much all of the Darlingtonia that were in the UK, except for a handful of plants that were able to put up with a bit more heat. So this is last year's picture, but you can see the new ones coming up, these little green cobra heads coming up. Among the Sarracenia, obviously, because I don't want to devote too much space to them, so I try to focus on species that are species and have a bit of location data or a bit about them, So this is, in fact, this one actually kind of bucks the trend. This is Sarracenia murray, so it's a hybrid of, I believe, Flava and Leucophylla. It's Sarracenia murray Liliana. So bred by Chris Rawlings of the UK, who also created Leviathan and other things like that. So it's a pretty tall murray. I keep it around because it's quite a kind of impressive height. But not the best murray in terms of aesthetics, but certainly a notably tall one. We've got the critically endangered Sarracenia aureophila, obviously from cultivated sources here in the UK. And I've collected seed off this a number of times, and some seed grown. This is seed grown Sarracenia minor var Orchifeniciensis from the Orchifenici swamp in Georgia. So I think this is 2 or 3 years old now. Could be bigger at this point. A lot of people really ramp up the fertilizer on Sarracenia seedlings to kind of size max them, but this is very much slow grown in a fairly cold greenhouse, so it's not, it's not the speediest. Rubra, this is a long-lidded form of rubra. These are some seedlings of a kind of really small dwarf Sarracenia purpurea hybrid, or not hybrid, selection called Tom Thumb, which is bred for kind of its very small size. This one's very obviously a hybrid. This one looks relatively pure. It was open pollinated, I think, and semi-self-pollinated, so I think this is the one I'm going to select though, because I want to keep the small trait, so I'm going to pick the runt of the litter. Yeah, this is Sarracenia siticina var Orchifeniciensis, bigger than kind of a lot of typical Sarracenia siticinas, the parrot pictures they call them, because it looks like little parrot heads and beaks. But that's just putting up its kind of spring flush of leaves that have been munched by slugs, I think, in some cases, which is a constant battle. What else we got? We got Drosera binata, Marston dragon. Hate this thing. It's so untidy. It gets about 2 to 3 feet wide, and it sprawls everywhere. So if anyone wants Marston dragon, contact me. You can have it. I forgot to mention as well, we've got some nice bog orchids and other flowering things next door in the kind of bog companion plants. So we've got rose pegonias, ladies' tresses, we've got grass pinks, we've got egret orchids, we've got Japanese Eleorchis japonica, I don't know the name for that, white flowered one, and then we've got Lilium Catesbyii, which is that kind of lovely red lily from the Pine Barrens and places like that. Moving across, we do have some banished capensis as well. I kind of sidelined them, but they persist in surviving. It's very difficult to kill Drosera capensis. So a couple of different forms here. This is a selection from Paul Debert, one of his giant ones. Well-known name from South Africa, I believe.
I think it was German.
Possibly German. I'm not familiar with him personally. Thea Waters Kloof. I'm going to get corrected on pronunciation here by the Afrikaans speaker. So a variety there, and then across I've got essentially my main collection of Utricularia is through in indoor conditions under lights. So this is kind of like the backup where effectively I throw extra pots here to test how cold hardy they are. And what survives. You know, it's a tough life for a tropical Utricularia in this greenhouse. But this is Utricularia trupinii from Rwanda. It's in section Calpadisco, so it's related to garden staples like Bisquamata and Livida and things like that. And as you can see, it's surviving and survived a pretty severe frost, I think of about -10 in here. So trupinii, that's past muster on cold hardiness, but lovely yellow flowers there. And then surprisingly, a lot of the Brazilian species tend to be quite hardy as well. This is Drosera flaccida. There's a Utricularia, Drosera intermedia, an Italian one from Lago di Pratignano that has survived here, just the one, but it's quite a nice little plant anyway. What else we got? This is a Pinguicula corsica, which I've been testing out in these fibre pots. They work quite well for Pinguicula because they kind of add the evaporative cooling effect to keep the roots cool. I think that's the main challenge with temperate Pinguicula, is if they get hot they tend to melt very quickly. So the fibre pots tend to keep them cool. And also it's lower than the other pots, so it's shaded from direct sun, which works quite well. So I'm expecting a seed set from that one this year. It's got lovely pale flowers. And other ones, you know, I've got this Drosera prelonga from Brazil, which has, again, I'm mixing everything up here. Utricularia prelonga from Brazil, which produces these amazing grassy leaves for Utricularia, as well as a second form of leaf, kind of more thick ones that lie flat to the ground, and then these thinner ones that stand up, amongst this beautiful red Sphagnum capillifolium. Possibly Austinii. I need to get a microscope and key that out. And a variety of Utricularia livida and things like that with these kind of wedge-shaped leaves from South Africa. And also livida comes from Mexico as well. And then amazingly, as I said, for Brazilian plants with surprising hardiness, we have this Utricularia cornigera and reniformis. But cornigera and reniformis are kind of easily confused. I kind of distinguish them on a vibes-based thing, but the more kind of glaucous ones with thicker leaves that kind of have a steeper angle and larger stems tend to be cornigera, but that's not a foolhardy rule. This one's from Serra dos Orgãos in southern Brazil, but that does pretty well as well. It dies back entirely over winter, but it produces pretty chunky rhizomes, as you can see. So it's pretty good at coming back from those over winter, just in a kind of loose mix of sphagnum and perlite here. But that's good. And the winters, you know, they sprout pretty vigorously after a cold winter, and tend to get flowers, but not yet. So my main sort of stack of Utricularia from section Orchidoides out here is over here. So this is Utricularia reniformis. This is the form enfant terrible, because it very rarely flowers, but it is very vigorous. As you can see, it produces a lot of leaves and they're quite beautiful. This is a really cool, very high altitude. I think this is about as high altitude as you can get for this species from Brazil. This is from Pico da Bandeira in Brazil. But this produces interesting ones because they're really, in many others you see they're more kidney shaped, and that's what reniformis means. Reniform means kidney shaped. So it's got the kind of notch, whereas these ones are much flatter. They don't have the same kind of angle. So the two ends of the leaves here don't extend very far back. It's relatively flat compared to other ones. But and short as well, because they grow in very kind of high, windy, cold, almost subalpine places. I think that might be a bit of a stretch for Brazil anyway, but yeah, that's an interesting form. This is my newest one, so it's just getting established in in this lovely live sphagnum. I think this is Sphagnum palustri. I've got a couple of other species as well, but this is from Cerro del Mar. So that's just getting established in. It looks like it produces a little more pigmentation than typical. This is another Cornigera. This one can produce leaves that get to, you know, 7-8 inches across tip to tip in late summer, early autumn. It's quite spectacular when it really gets going. You know, they can get to about that kind of tall and really wide. And then this one, this was the original sort of big sister, it was called. It was registered alongside Enfant Terrible, I believe. But this has got a kind of really neat like overlap of the back two corners, which I think is a really nice feature of this species. You know, almost looks peltate, like Nelumbifolia, its close relative. I've got some jasmine back there just because this is my throne down here as well. I tend to sit out here with a cup of tea and enjoy the evening looking at my plants, but the jasmine gives it a nice scent. What else have I got? I've got some orchids and ferns and camellias along here as well. A bit of spontaneous variegation has popped up in here. I'm going to keep an eye on that. Anyway, underneath here is where I've got some extra spare Utricularia, which, I mean, to the majority of carnivorous plant growers, you're thinking, oh great, he's got some pots of moss. Here we go. But no, I've got some nice flowers off this little Biosquamata from Table Mountain. Lovely little flowers, so different to the kind of typical devil spawn, although I really hate that cultivar registration. I think it's far too broad. Anyway, that's tea for a different day. This is from Table Mountain. Lovely broad lower corolla here. The corolla is the fused petals. But interestingly, when you grow this inside in high humidity and warm conditions, it gets these horrible little tiny white flowers that just look really, you know, unremarkable. But then when you grow it out in a bit of cold, a bit of sun, it gets these beautiful different flowers. So it just goes to show the kind of the plastic morphology of Utricularia. Some weedy Drosera that I've challenged Hendry to try and identify, but neither of us are sure. So if you know, let me know. I think it's possibly Nidiformis. Maybe.
It's my guess as well.
I don't really know Drosera that well, so leave your comments down below. So these Australian ones as well, they tend to be really cold hardy as well. We've got Monanthos from Queenstown. Monanthos meaning one flower in Greek. So it produces these inflorescences singly, and then it's got lovely kind of almost metallic, slightly reflective corollas. When they do come out, it's got a single yellow, bright yellow streak down contrasting with the purple. But you can see really vigorous leaves that withstand the cold no problem whatsoever. So I would really recommend them, and if you're in a temperate environment, definitely seek out things like Dichotoma and Monanthos. And again, some more Brazilian ones as well. I think this is Brazilian anyway. Oh no, this is Warburgii from Zhejiang in southern China. So the kind of interesting feature about this, there's 3 in the section that this belongs to. Nigrocentes, along with Caerulea and something else. Hirta, I think, possibly. I can't remember. But it produces rosettes, which is interesting for Utricularia. You can kind of see them there. Loose rosettes and then spreads as well. But there's a flower coming up here too. It's interesting because the kind of the palate, or the little bump at the mouth of the flower has these interesting little horns on it in Warburgii, so definitely something to look up, and definitely a species I would recommend. It's beautiful when it flowers. And the kind of indefatigable Utricularia livida as well, or livida, some people say, but this is a thick-scaped form from Zambia. Again, these are looking atrocious because they've been out in pretty deep shade and pretty cold conditions, but this is beautiful when it kind of really is given the attention that it requires, which is how it looks in my kind of main collection, obviously under lights and things. But when it's developing flowers under the surface, the interesting thing is when they're smaller than this and just developing, they're really bright, vibrant purple in colour. It's a lovely feature of that. But this is a very heavily pigmented variety. Interestingly, it produces so many, it's from Zimbabwe, this particular clone. It produces so many inflorescences, but I think it uses them primarily for photosynthesis. because I've never seen it actually open a flower off these. It just produces these inflorescences and then they kind of go like that after a while, where the top kind of dies back. Not so many leaves as well, and the leaves are quite heavily pigmented, which I would imagine would somewhat inhibit photosynthesis. Are we going? Okay, and then the final kind of thing that I'm going to talk about here is my temperate pinguicula. I always struggle with these because they die off during summer warmth, even here in Scotland. So I keep them beside the vent of the greenhouse to get a bit of kind of breeze coming in. But no, they have been. I have had some for 5-6 years, so I do get a couple of losses over summer, and sometimes they go a bit dormant early. But got some interesting ones here. So some different vulgaris forms, some longifolias, vallisnerifolia. I had to trim this back actually, the long leaves on that, but you can see it's producing them again. So it produces first a rosette of these kind of flat veined leaves, and then it eventually produces kind of long, much more filiform leaves similar to its next door neighbour here. And then I've got the kind of the red form of that as well, some seed grown ones, much more heavily pigmented leaves, but it's actually it's got glandular on both sides of the leaves, which is quite useful if you've got long filiform things to catch things with. We've also got some of the kind of new age Spanish species, Dertosensis, which is I did hand pollinate, and it looks like that's successfully set fruit. Lovely little species there, pale blue flowers, bluey purple. And Christine from Italy, from the Val di Luce, which I didn't hand pollinate, but it does look like it has been either pollinated on its own or self-pollinated, because there is a fruit developing on that, but that'll be interesting to see. So I'll have some seedlings from that. Yeah, no, these guys are fairly tricky, but once I kind of get my plans to renovate the greenhouse and move things around, they should be looking better. They're very much shade grown this year, so they're kind of a little bit etiolated, but don't mind them. Anyway, that's as much as I have to say about the greenhouse. Obviously my main collection is tropical inside under lights, but thank you for visiting.
Thank you for showing us around.
No problem.
Enjoy. See you next time. Full focus.